Blood streaked across the white cotton sheet as Dr. Zephyr Zavala struggled to save the miner's life. Her hands moved with precision, despite the whispers that had followed her into this remote mountain town of Saint Elmo, Colorado. It was 1878, and a woman doctor was rare enough to draw suspicion, but one who could pull men back from death's door. That was the devil's work, according to the townsfolk. "Steady now," Zephyr murmured, more to herself than to her unconscious patient. The mining accident had crushed his ribs, driving bone fragments dangerously close to his lungs. Working by the light of an oil lamp, she carefully extracted each splinter, her brow furrowed in concentration. Outside the cabin, voices grew louder. The patient's wife had allowed her inside, desperate for help when the company doctor was 3 towns away. But the neighbors had other ideas. "You can't let that witch touch him." A man's voice boomed. "Jonah won't survive her potions and spells." Zephyr ignored them, focusing instead on her patient's shallow breathing. 29 years old, and already she'd faced more opposition than most doctors encountered in a lifetime. After graduating from the Woman's Medical College of Pennsylvania, she'd headed west, drawn by the freedom of the frontier and the desperate need for medical care. What she hadn't expected was the suspicion. A sudden pounding on the door made her hand jerk, but she steadied it immediately. "Mrs. Patterson, you open this door right now." The crowd outside was growing bolder. The miner's wife, a thin woman with deep lines around her eyes, glanced anxiously at Zephyr. "They'll break it down if I don't." "Let me finish first," Zephyr said calmly. "Your husband is stable, but I need to close him up." The pounding intensified, but Zephyr's hands remained steady as she placed the final stitches. She had just covered the wound when the door burst open, revealing a group of angry men led by the town's barber, who fancied himself a medical man. "Get away from him, witch!" the barber shouted. Zephyr stood, her green eyes flashing as she positioned herself between the crowd and her patient. "I'm a doctor, gentlemen, a graduate of a proper medical college. Mr. Patterson has survived his injuries, but he'll die from infection if you interfere with his care. We've heard about your kind," a heavy-set man spat, "mixing herbs and saying incantations. No proper woman would handle a man's naked body or spill his blood." "I've spilled no blood that wasn't already flowing," Zephyr replied evenly, though her heart hammered in her chest. "And I've stopped it from flowing further." The standoff might have escalated if not for the sudden commotion outside. A horse's whinny followed by heavy boots on the porch steps announced a new arrival. The crowd parted reluctantly as a tall figure filled the doorway. Dust covered his dark clothes, and a week's worth of stubble shadowed his jaw. His eyes, the color of a summer storm, took in the scene in one sweeping glance. The gun at his hip spoke of capability, but it was the calm authority in his stance that quieted the room. "What seems to be the trouble here?" His voice was deep, with the hint of a southern drawl. "This woman claims to be a doctor," the barber explained. "She's working her witchcraft on Jonah Patterson." The newcomer's gaze fell on Zephyr, taking in her blood-stained apron and the determined set of her jaw. Then he looked at the patient, who was breathing steadily now. "Looks to me like she's doing doctoring work," he said, "and doing it well." "You don't understand, Novak," the barber insisted. "Women can't be doctors. It ain't natural." The man Novak raised an eyebrow. "When I caught that bullet outside of Denver last year, I didn't much care about what was natural. I cared about what kept me breathing." He turned to Zephyr. "Xavier Novak, madam. Most folks call me Zav." "Dr. Zephyr Zavala," she replied, not dropping her guard. "Well, doctor." "Zavala," Zav said. "How's your patient doing? He'll live if infection doesn't set in. I've cleaned the wound thoroughly and removed all the bone fragments." Zav nodded, then turned to the crowd. Seems to me you all should be thanking the doctor, not threatening her. Now, why don't you give the man some peace to recover? I'm sure you've got minds to work or whiskey to drink. His words, though casual, carried weight. Reluctantly, the men began to disperse, throwing suspicious glances over their shoulders. The barber was the last to leave, pointing a finger at Zephyr. This ain't over, witch. People will know what you are. When they were gone, Mrs. Patterson hurried to her husband's side, tears of relief streaming down her face. Thank you, doctor, she whispered. And you, Mr. Novak. Zephyr began packing her medical bag, her hands finally betraying a slight tremor now that the danger had passed. I'll return tomorrow to change the dressing. He'll need to rest for at least 2 weeks. Madam, Zav said quietly, do you have somewhere safe to stay tonight? Zephyr straightened, meeting his gaze directly. I have a room at the boarding house. I doubt Mrs. Simmons will welcome you back after this. News travels fast in Saint Elmo. Zephyr's shoulders sagged slightly. She'd been in town less than a week, hoping to establish a practice after her unsuccessful attempts in Denver. Each town had been the same initial curiosity followed by suspicion and hostility. I have a cabin just outside town, Zav continued. You're welcome to use it while I'm gone. I'm heading out tomorrow on business. Zephyr's eyes narrowed. I don't need charity, Mr. Novak. It's not charity, doctor. It's self-preservation. This town needs a physician whether they know it or not. Before she could respond, a child burst through the door, her face streaked with tears. Doctor, please come quick. Ma's having the baby, but something's wrong. There's so much blood. Zephyr didn't hesitate, grabbing her bag and following the girl. Zav fell into step beside her. Where are we going? He asked. Zephyr raised an eyebrow. Those men might still be looking for trouble. She couldn't argue with his logic. The Coleman farm, apparently, she said, nodding toward the girl running ahead of them. The girl led them to a small farmhouse on the outskirts of town. Inside, a woman's screams pierced the air. Zephyr rushed to the bedroom where Sarah Coleman lay writhing on blood-soaked sheets. Her husband, James, paced nearby, his face ashen. The baby's turned wrong, Sarah's mother explained. Been trying to come for hours. Zephyr quickly washed her hands and examined the laboring woman. The situation was dire, a breech birth with heavy bleeding. Without intervention, both mother and child would die. I need to turn the baby, Zephyr explained, rolling up her sleeves. Mr. Coleman, you should wait outside. James looked relieved to escape and hurried out, but not before giving Zephyr a warning look. You save them, you hear. Don't be using any witchcraft. Zav remained by the door, his presence somehow reassuring. Need any help, doctor? Boil water, she instructed, and find me clean cloths. The next 2 hours were a battle against death itself. Zephyr worked methodically, turning the infant in the womb while keeping Sarah from bleeding out. She administered herbs to strengthen contractions and ease pain. All the while, she spoke calmly to Sarah, encouraging her. Finally, with a last push, a baby boy entered the world, silent and blue. Zephyr quickly cleared his airways and massaged his tiny chest. For a terrifying moment, nothing happened. Then the child gasped and let out a healthy wail. Sarah wept with relief as Zephyr placed the swaddled infant in her arms. You saved us both, she whispered. Rest now, Zephyr instructed, preparing a tea for the new mother. Drink this. It will help your body heal and bring in your milk. Outside the bedroom, James Coleman and his mother-in-law waited anxiously. When Zephyr emerged, exhaustion evident in the slump of her shoulders, James stepped forward. My wife, the baby, both alive and well, Zephyr assured him. You have a son, Mr. Coleman. The man's face transformed with joy. He rushed past Zephyr into the bedroom, leaving her with the older woman. That was a miracle, the mother-in-law said, crossing herself. I was sure we'd lose them both. Not a miracle, Zephyr corrected gently. Just medical science. The woman shook her head. Call it what you will, but I know divine intervention when I see it. You've got a gift, doctor. Zephyr gave instructions for Sarah's care, then stepped onto the porch where Zav waited. The sun was beginning to rise, painting the Colorado mountains in shades of gold and pink. She inhaled deeply, letting the crisp mountain air clear the scent of blood and fear from her nostrils. You look ready to collapse, doctor, Zav observed. She was. 2 major medical emergencies within hours of each other had drained her reserves. I need to find somewhere to sleep. My offer still stands. The cabin's not much, but it's quiet and secure. Too tired to argue, Zephyr nodded. Lead the way, Mr. Novak. They walked in silence through the awakening town. A few early risers paused in their activities to stare at the blood-stained woman and the imposing man beside her. Whispers followed in their wake. You don't seem bothered by their talk, Zephyr noted. Zav shrugged. People will talk regardless. I found it's best to give them as little ammunition as possible. Is that why you're offering me your cabin? To avoid association with the town which, he glanced at her, amusement crinkling the corners of his eyes. If I were worried about my reputation, doctor, I wouldn't be walking with you in broad daylight. The cabin sat nestled among pines about a mile outside town. It was simple but well-maintained, with a small porch and a corral for horses. Inside was a single room with a bed, table, stove, and various supplies neatly organized. It's not much, Zav said, but it's yours as long as you need it. I'll be back in a week or so. Zephyr set her medical bag down, surveying the space. Where will you sleep? I've got business in Denver. By the time I return, you'll either have found more permanent accommodations or decided to move on. He hesitated. Though I hope it's the former. Saint Elmo needs a doctor with your skills. Even if that doctor is a woman, she challenged. Especially if she's a woman, he replied. I've found that women often possess patience and attention to detail that many male doctors lack. Surprised by his response, Zephyr studied him more carefully. Xavier Novak was different from the cowboys and miners she'd encountered since coming west. There was an education in his speech, a thoughtfulness in his manner that seemed at odds with his rugged appearance. What business takes you to Denver, Mr. Novak? She asked, curiosity getting the better of her exhaustion. The boring kind, he said with a smile. Investments, primarily. I've interests in several mines in the territory. He moved toward the door. There's food in the pantry and fresh water from the well out back. Lock the door behind me. When he was gone, Zephyr sank onto the bed, too tired to even remove her boots. Despite her exhaustion, her mind raced. 2 lives saved in one night surely that would change some minds about her presence in town. But experience had taught her that people's superstitions ran deep, especially when it came to women stepping outside their prescribed roles. She fell asleep wondering about the enigmatic Xavier Novak and what had prompted his kindness to a stranger, a female doctor, no less in a town that had already labeled her a witch. The week that followed proved Zephyr's suspicions correct. While the Patterson and Coleman families defended her vigorously, many in Saint Elmo remained wary. The boarding house had indeed refused her return, and the general store owner watched her carefully when she purchased supplies, as if expecting her to pocket a toad or eye of newt. Yet there were small victories. A miner with a festering wound sought her help, slinking to the cabin after dark. A mother brought her feverish child. A young woman came for female troubles, too embarrassed to speak directly about her painful monthly cycles. Word spread that the doctor in Xavier Novak's cabin could heal without judgment. She charged little, accepting payment in eggs, fresh bread, or a few coins when available. By the 5th day, Zephyr had begun to hope that perhaps Saint Elmo might become home after all. Then came the poison accusations. It started with the death of old Mr. Winters, who had been ill for months with consumption. Zephyr had visited him twice, providing herbal teas to ease his breathing and pain. When he passed peacefully in his sleep, his daughter-in-law began spreading rumors that the witch doctor had hastened his end. She gave him potions, the woman insisted to anyone who would listen. He was improving until she came. The whispers grew, fueled by the barber's continued insistence that no woman could practice real medicine. When a child Zephyr had treated for fever developed a rash, a common reaction to the willow bark tea she'd prescribed, the rumors intensified. She was returning from visiting Sarah Coleman and her thriving infant when she noticed the changed atmosphere in town. People crossed the street to avoid her. A group of men outside the saloon fell silent as she passed, then erupted in low, ominous laughter. Dr. Zavala. Zephyr turned to see James Coleman hurrying toward her, his expression troubled. "You shouldn't be in town right now," he said quietly. "There's talk at the saloon, bad talk." "About my witchcraft?" she asked with resignation. "Worse. They're saying you poisoned old man Winters. That you're experimenting on the townsfolk." He glanced around nervously. "The barbers got them all riled up. Some are talking about running you out of town." "I've done nothing wrong," Zephyr said firmly, though her heart raced. She'd faced hostility before, but this felt different, more dangerous. "Doesn't matter," James replied. "You should head back to the cabin and lock the door. I'll come warn you if they decide to do something foolish." Zephyr nodded gratefully and turned toward the path to Zav's cabin, walking briskly but forcing herself not to run. She wouldn't give them the satisfaction of seeing her afraid. She had just reached the edge of town when she heard horses approaching. Looking back, she saw 3 riders moving purposefully in her direction. She recognized them as regulars from the saloon troublemakers who'd had run-ins with the town's small sheriff's office before. Abandoning dignity, Zephyr hiked up her skirts and ran. The cabin was still half a mile away, and the path was exposed. The sound of hoofbeats grew louder as the men urged their mounts faster. "Where you going, witch doctor?" one called. "We just want to talk about your special medicines." Zephyr didn't waste breath responding. She cut off the path, hoping the trees would slow their pursuit. Branches whipped at her face as she scrambled through the underbrush. The riders cursed as they were forced to slow, but they continued to follow. Her lungs burned as she pushed herself harder. The cabin was in sight now, its solid wooden walls promising safety. If she could just reach it, barricade the door. A horse burst through the trees ahead, cutting off her path. The rider, a man with a scar twisting his lip into a permanent sneer, grinned down at her. Now, doctor, no need to run. We just want to see your witch's book of spells." Zephyr backed away, only to find the other 2 riders had circled behind her. She was trapped. "I have no spells, only medical knowledge," she said, struggling to keep her voice steady. "Let me pass, after you've been poisoning our people," the scarred man spat. "I don't think so. We're going to search that cabin of yours, find your potions, and then decide what to do with you." They were drunk, Zephyr realized, drunk and dangerous in their ignorance. "The cabin belongs to Xavier Novak," she said, hoping the name might give them pause. "He won't take kindly to you breaking in." The men exchanged glances. Even drunk, they seemed to recognize the implied threat. Novak's reputation, whatever it was, clearly carried weight. "Novak's not here," the scarred man said finally. "And by the time he returns, we'll have cleaned up this town's witch problem." He dismounted, reaching for Zephyr's arm. She stepped back, searching desperately for an escape route. The other men closed in. Then came the distinctive sound of a rifle being cocked. "I wouldn't do that if I were you, Daniels." The voice was familiar, though harder than Zephyr remembered. Xavier Novak emerged from the trees, a Winchester rifle trained steadily on the scarred man. "This isn't your concern, Novak," Daniels said, though he'd frozen in place. "The doctor is under my protection. That makes it very much my concern." Zav's eyes were cold as he surveyed the three men. "Now, you boys have a choice. Ride away now or try your luck against this rifle." For a tense moment, Daniel seemed to weigh his options. Then, with a curse, he remounted his horse. "This isn't over," he warned. "The town won't stand for a witch in their midst." "The town will do as it pleases," Zav replied evenly. "But you three will leave the doctor alone or answer to me. Is that understood?" Without waiting for a response, he moved to Zephyr's side, keeping the rifle ready. Only when the three men had ridden away did he lower the weapon. "Are you hurt?" he asked, his voice gentle now as he examined her face, which was scratched from branches. "No," Zephyr managed, though she was trembling with reaction. "You returned early." "Fortunate timing," he agreed, guiding her toward the cabin. "Let's get inside. We need to talk." Once inside, Zav bolted the door and set his rifle aside. Zephyr sank into a chair, watching as he efficiently stoked the stove and set water to heat. "You've been busy in my absence," he observed, nodding toward the small collection of medicines and herbs she'd organized on a shelf. "I hope you don't mind. I've had a few patients." "I expected nothing less." He poured the hot water into a basin and brought it to her with a clean cloth. "For your scratches." Zephyr accepted gratefully, cleaning the small cuts on her face and hands. The warm water helped steady her. "Why did you come back early?" she asked. Zav settled into the chair opposite her. "I heard rumors in Denver. A female doctor in Saint Elmo who could perform miracles. Some said she was blessed by God. Others claimed she was in league with the devil." He smiled slightly. "I realized they were talking about you and that trouble might be brewing." "Those men said the town won't tolerate a witch." "Some won't," Zav agreed. "But others are already grateful for your skills. The Colemans, the Pattersons. Even old widow Murphy, who told me her rheumatism hasn't troubled her since you gave her that salve." Hope flickered in Zephyr's chest, but she tamped it down. "It's always the same. No matter how many I help, there are always those who fear what they don't understand." "A woman with medical knowledge must be unnatural, dangerous." "People fear change," Zav said. "And the West is changing. The railroad is coming. Cities are growing. Women like you are pushing boundaries. You don't seem troubled by these changes, Mr. Novak." "Xavier," he corrected. "And no, I welcome progress. It's why I invest in mines and railroads." He leaned forward, his expression serious. "But progress comes with growing pains. What happened today is just the beginning. Daniels and his friends won't be deterred for long." "I can't run again," Zephyr said, surprising herself with the determination in her voice. "I've been running since I left Philadelphia. Denver, Boulder, now here. Each time the same story. I'm tired of running." "I'm not suggesting you run," Zav replied. "I'm suggesting you fight, but not alone." "What do you propose?" "A partnership of sorts. You need protection and legitimacy in the community. I need a doctor I can trust." Zephyr raised an eyebrow. "Are you often in need of medical attention, Mr. Novak?" His smile was enigmatic. "My business interests occasionally lead to disagreements. But it's not just for me. I employ miners, laborers. Accidents happen. So you want to hire me as your personal physician. I want to provide you with a proper clinic. A building in town where you can practice openly under my visible support." Zephyr stared at him, stunned by the offer. "Why would you do this? You barely know me." Zav's expression grew distant. 3 years ago, I was caught in a blizzard near Leadville. My horse broke a leg and I was miles from shelter. I would have died if not for a Ute woman who found me. She took me to her camp, treated my frostbite, saved my life." His eyes refocused on Zephyr. "When I tried to return later to thank her, I learned the settlement had driven her away, called her a witch because she used traditional healing methods they didn't understand. And you see me as a chance to repay that debt. I see you as someone who deserves the opportunity to use your gifts without persecution," he corrected. "The debt can never truly be repaid." Zephyr considered his offer. A proper clinic would change everything. With Xavier Novak's backing, the town would have to at least tolerate her presence. "This partnership," she said carefully, "what exactly would it entail?" "I purchase a building. You establish your practice. You treat my employees at reduced rates, and in return, I ensure your safety and standing in the community." It sounded too good to be true, which made Zephyr suspicious. "And what do you truly get from this arrangement, Xavier?" He held her gaze steadily. "A skilled physician nearby. A salve to my conscience. And perhaps," he added with a slight smile, "the pleasure of your company now and then." The last comment hung in the air between them. For the first time, Zephyr allowed herself to truly look at the man across from her. Xavier Novak was handsome in a weathered way, his features strong and his eyes intelligent. There was an intensity about him that both intrigued and unnerved her. "I accept your offer," she said finally, "on a trial basis." "Excellent." Zav stood, extending his hand to seal their agreement. "We'll begin tomorrow." Zephyr took his hand, noting the calluses that spoke of a man who didn't just give orders but worked alongside his men. His grip was firm but not overpowering, respectful of her strength rather than trying to dominate it. "Tomorrow," she agreed, wondering if she had just made the best decision of her life or the worst. The next morning dawned clear and bright, the Colorado mountains standing sentinel over Saint Elmo. Zephyr rose early, organizing her medical supplies while Zav went into town to arrange for the purchase of a suitable building. He returned mid-morning, satisfaction evident in his stride. "The old assayer's office," he announced. "Empty since McCreary left for the new strike in Leadville. Good location, solid construction." "How soon can we take possession?" Zephyr asked, already mentally arranging her clinic. "Immediately. I've paid in full." He grinned at her surprised expression. "When an opportunity presents itself, I don't believe in delay." By afternoon, they had moved Zephyr's few possessions to the small apartment behind the assayer's office. The front room, once cleared of dust and debris, would make an excellent examination space. A second room could serve as a recovery area for patients too ill to return home immediately. Word of the new clinic spread quickly. By evening, a small crowd had gathered outside, curiosity overcoming suspicion. Zav opened the door wide, inviting them in. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced, "Saint Elmo now has a proper medical clinic and a highly qualified physician to staff it. Dr. Zavala is a graduate of the Women's Medical College of Pennsylvania and has practiced throughout Colorado territory." The crowd murmured, some skeptical, others interested. Sarah Coleman pushed forward, her baby in her arms. "This doctor saved my life and my son's," she declared loudly. "When no one else could help us, she turned him in the womb and stopped my bleeding. I don't care if you call that witchcraft or medicine, I call it a miracle." Jonah Patterson, still moving gingerly from his injuries, stepped up beside her. "She pulled bone splinters from my lungs," he added. Doc Phillips in Buena Vista said I'd never have survived the trip to see him. She's the reason I'm standing here today. More testimonials followed, surprising Zephyr with their number and fervor. It seemed she had helped more people than she realized during her brief time in St. Elmo. Not everyone was convinced. The barber stood at the back of the crowd, his face twisted with displeasure. Daniels and his friends watched from across the street, their hostility palpable. But for now, they were outnumbered by the curious and the supportive. When the crowd dispersed, Zav closed the door, his expression thoughtful. "A good start," he said, "but the real test will come when they need your services." He was right, of course. Talk was one thing, but allowing a woman a suspected witch, no less to treat their ailments, was another matter entirely. Still, Zephyr felt more hopeful than she had in months. "Thank you," she said simply, "for all of this." Zav inclined his head. "Get some rest, doctor. Tomorrow, you open officially." The following days brought a steady trickle of patients, mostly women and children at first, with ailments they felt comfortable discussing with a female physician. Slowly, men began to appear as well, usually with injuries that couldn't wait for the circuit doctor's monthly visit. Each successful treatment built Zephyr's reputation. Each patient who walked out better than they arrived helped silence the whispers of witchcraft. Xavier's visible support didn't hurt either. He made a point of visiting the clinic daily, engaging Zephyr in conversation where others could see, demonstrating his trust in her abilities. A month after the clinic opened, the inevitable finally happened, a true emergency that would test both Zephyr's skills and the town's acceptance. It began with the sound of panicked shouting in the street. Zephyr looked up from the inventory she was taking to see a crowd gathering around a wagon that had pulled up outside the saloon. "Doctor," someone pounded on her door. "Cave in at the Silver Strike. Men trapped and injured." Zephyr grabbed her medical bag and rushed outside. The wagon was filled with bloody, dust-covered miners. Some moaned in pain, others lay ominously still. "Get them into the clinic," she ordered, professional instincts taking over. Quickly but carefully. To her relief, the townspeople responded immediately, helping carry the injured men inside. She directed the most severely wounded to the examination table and the recovery room beds, the others to pallets hastily arranged on the floor. "What happened?" she asked as she began assessing injuries. "Support beam collapsed," a relatively uninjured miner explained. "Caught 6 men underneath. We got them out, but—" He gestured helplessly at his comrades. Zephyr worked methodically, prioritizing those with the most severe injuries. A crushed leg that would require amputation. A head wound that had already swollen dangerously. Broken ribs, punctured lungs, internal bleeding. Word spread quickly, and soon the clinic was crowded with volunteers. Wives and mothers ready to assist. Men offering to fetch water or supplies. Even the barber appeared, grudgingly offering his assistance. "I've some experience with injuries," he admitted gruffly. Zephyr nodded, too busy to reject any help. "Clean that head wound," she directed. Gentle but thorough. Hours passed in a blur of blood and desperate measures. Zephyr performed the amputation with grim efficiency, grateful that the miner had passed out before she began. She drained fluid from around another man's lungs, allowing him to breathe again. She set bones, stitched wounds, applied poultices to prevent infection. Throughout it all, she remained focused, her hands steady, her mind clear. This was what she had trained for. This was why she had endured years of ridicule and hostility for moments like this when her knowledge meant the difference between life and death. At some point, Xavier appeared, his own clothes dirty from the mine. He had been there when the collapse occurred, she learned later, and had helped organize the rescue effort. Now he moved among the injured men, speaking quietly to each, offering words of encouragement. When he reached Zephyr, she was swaying with exhaustion, having been on her feet for nearly 12 hours straight. "You need rest," he said quietly. "There's still one more," she replied, nodding toward a miner with a compound fracture of the femur. "The bone must be set properly or he'll never walk right again." "Then I'll assist you," Zav said. "Tell me what to do." With his help, Zephyr completed the final procedure. The bone was set, the wound cleaned and bandaged. Only then did she allow herself to acknowledge her exhaustion. "6 men," she murmured, surveying the clinic now full of sleeping or sedated patients, all still breathing. "Thanks to you," Zav said, his voice thick with an emotion Zephyr was too tired to identify. She shook her head. "Thanks to proper medical care." "Anyone with training could have—" "No," he interrupted. "Not anyone. I've seen company doctors who wouldn't have attempted half of what you did today, who wouldn't have saved that leg or drained that lung." He took her hand, his grip gentle but insistent. "What you did today wasn't just medicine, Zephyr. It was courage." The use of her first name startled her almost as much as the compliment. In the month they'd worked together, they had maintained a careful formality despite the growing ease between them. "I'm just—" She began, then stopped, uncertain how to respond. "Remarkable," Zav finished for her. "Now you need sleep. I'll watch over them tonight." Too exhausted to argue, Zephyr retreated to her small apartment. She barely managed to remove her blood-stained apron before collapsing onto her bed, asleep almost instantly. She woke to sunlight and the smell of coffee. For a moment, she was disoriented, then the events of the previous day came rushing back. She rose quickly, pulling on a fresh dress before hurrying to the clinic. The scene that greeted her stopped her in her tracks. The wounded miners were awake, some sitting up and talking quietly. Women moved among them, offering water and broth. Near the stove, Xavier was pouring coffee, speaking with the barber who had once been her most vocal critic. When the men saw her, the room fell silent. Then, to Zephyr's astonishment, the barber removed his hat. "Doctor," he said, his voice gruff but sincere, "I owe you an apology. What you did yesterday, it wasn't witchcraft. It was a blessing." One by one, the others in the room echoed his sentiment. Wives thanked her for saving their husbands. Miners promised to send their families to her for care. Even the mine owner, a hard-faced man named Sullivan, grudgingly acknowledged her skill. "The company doctor in Buena Vista would have lost at least 3 of these men," he admitted. "Your clinic is an asset to this community, Dr. Zavala." Zephyr accepted their thanks with grace, though she felt almost lightheaded with the realization of what had happened. In one day, one terrible, miraculous day, she had transformed from suspected witch to respected physician. Later, when the clinic had quieted and most of the visitors had departed, Zav brought her a cup of coffee and a plate of food. "Eat," he insisted. "You barely touched breakfast." She complied, suddenly aware of her hunger. "Things have changed," she said between bites. "Yes," he agreed, settling into a chair beside her. "Though not everyone will be so easily convinced." As if summoned by his words, the door opened to reveal Daniels and his 2 companions from the confrontation in the woods. They stood awkwardly in the doorway, hats in hands, eyes darting around the clinic. Zav tensed, but Zephyr laid a restraining hand on his arm. "Yes, gentlemen. Do you need medical attention?" Daniels cleared his throat. "No, madam, I mean, doctor, we came to—" He glanced at his friends, who nodded encouragingly. "To apologize for our behavior. It was unworthy." The apology was clearly painful for him, and Zephyr suspected it had more to do with pressure from the community than genuine remorse. Still, it was a step. "Apology accepted," she said simply. "If you or your families need medical care in the future, my door is open." They nodded awkwardly and retreated, leaving Zephyr and Xavier alone with the sleeping patients. "Well," Zav said, a smile tugging at his lips, "it seems Saint Elmo has decided to embrace its witch doctor after all." Zephyr laughed softly, the sound surprising her. When had she last truly laughed? Not a witch, she corrected. Just a woman with medical training. To some, that's even more miraculous. Zav's expression grew serious. You've won them over, Zephyr. The clinic will thrive now. We've won them over, she corrected. Your support made this possible. He shook his head. I only provided the opportunity. Your skill and dedication did the rest. He hesitated, then added, I find myself wondering what other miracles you might perform given the chance. The way he looked at her sent warmth spreading through Zephyr's body. Over the past month, she had come to admire Xavier Novak deeply. His intelligence, his quiet strength, his unwavering support of her work. She had pushed aside these feelings, focusing instead on establishing her practice. But now, with the immediate crisis past and her position in the community secured, she could no longer ignore the growing attraction between them. What exactly are you asking, Xavier? His eyes held her steadily. Have dinner with me, not as colleagues or business partners. As a man and woman who might have more to offer each other than professional courtesy. The invitation was clear yet respectful, leaving her room to decline without awkwardness, but Zephyr found she didn't want to decline. Yes, she said simply. I'd like that. The dinner took place 2 evenings later, after the most seriously injured miners had been moved to their homes for continued care. Xavier arranged for the hotel restaurant to prepare a private meal in a small dining room, normally reserved for visiting dignitaries. Zephyr wore her best dress, a deep green that complemented her eyes and the copper highlights in her dark hair. When Xavier saw her, his appreciative gaze made her flush with pleasure. You look beautiful, he said, helping her into her chair with old-world courtesy. Though I confess I find you equally compelling in your physician's apron. The meal was excellent, the conversation even better. For the first time they spoke not of the clinic or the town, but of themselves. Xavier told her of his childhood in Virginia, his education cut short by the Civil War, his journey west in search of new opportunities. I started as a prospector, he explained. Got lucky with a silver claim near Leadville. Used the profits to invest in other mines, then in businesses that supported the mining industry. Now I have interests throughout Colorado territory. A self-made man, Zephyr observed. As you are a self-made woman, he countered. Tell me about your journey to medicine. She told him of growing up in Philadelphia, the daughter of a Spanish immigrant father and an American mother. Of her father's unexpected support when she expressed interest in medicine, despite society's disapproval. Of the rigorous training at the Woman's Medical College, where she and her female colleagues endured ridicule and hostility from male medical students and practitioners. We were called unnatural, unfeminine, she recalled. Men claimed our delicate constitutions would collapse under the strain of medical study, that our presence in the lecture halls would distract male students from their work. Yet you persevered. We had to. There were women suffering because they were too embarrassed to describe their ailments to male physicians. Children dying because mothers couldn't afford proper medical care. We knew we could help. And now you are, Zav said, raising his wine glass in a toast, to perseverance. As the evening progressed, their conversation grew more personal. Zav spoke of his brief, failed marriage to a Boston socialite who couldn't adapt to life in the Colorado territory. Zephyr confessed her own romantic disappointment with a fellow medical student who had ultimately chosen a more conventional wife. He said he admired my mind but couldn't imagine introducing me as my wife, the doctor, she recalled with a rueful smile. I believe he married a pianist instead. Artistic, but not threatening to his masculine pride. His loss, Zav said simply. A man secure in himself has no need to diminish a woman's achievements. By the time he walked her back to her apartment, a new understanding had developed between them. At her door, he took her hand, his thumb tracing circles on her palm. "I'd like to call on you properly, Zephyr, if you're amenable." Her pulse quickened at his touch. "I am," she admitted, "though you should know that my work will always come first. I can't be the kind of woman who sets aside her vocation for marriage and family." "I would never ask that of you," Zav replied. "Your dedication to medicine is part of what I admire most about you." He leaned forward slowly, giving her time to withdraw if she wished. Instead, Zephyr closed the distance between them, meeting his lips with her own. The kiss was gentle at first, then deepened with a hunger that surprised them both. When they finally parted, they were both breathing heavily. "Good night, Doctor," Zav said, his voice rough with restrained desire. "Good night, Mr. Novak," she replied, unable to suppress a smile. The following weeks brought a new rhythm to Zephyr's life. By day, she tended to patients in her increasingly busy clinic. Word of her skills had spread to neighboring settlements, bringing people from miles around seeking treatment. By evening, she often found herself in Xavier's company dining together, walking through town, or simply sitting on the clinic's porch discussing the day's events. Their courtship progressed slowly, respectfully, yet with an undercurrent of passion that made Zephyr's heart race whenever Xavier looked at her a certain way. He never interfered with her work, even when emergencies disrupted their plans. Instead, he often stayed to help, fetching supplies or providing an extra pair of hands when needed. The town watched their developing relationship with interest. Some approved, seeing it as further evidence of Dr. Zavala's acceptance into the community. Others gossiped about the wealthy mine owner and his unusual choice of companion. But the hostility that had greeted Zephyr's arrival had largely dissipated, replaced by grudging respect and, in many cases, genuine appreciation. 3 months after the mining accident that had cemented her position in Saint Elmo, Zephyr was summoned to attend the birth of Sarah Coleman's sister's child. The labor was long but uncomplicated, resulting in a healthy baby girl whom the parents named Zephyra in the doctor's honor. As she walked home in the pre-dawn light, exhausted but satisfied, Zephyr reflected on how much her life had changed. For the first time since beginning her medical career, she felt truly accepted for who she was both as a physician and as a woman. And much of that acceptance, she knew, was due to the man waiting for her on the clinic's porch. Xavier rose as she approached, holding out a cup of hot coffee. "Successful delivery." "Very," she confirmed, accepting the coffee gratefully. "Mother and daughter doing well. They named her Zephyra." "A tribute to the miracle worker of Saint Elmo," Zev said with a smile. Zephyr shook her head. "Not miracles, just medicine. To those whose lives you've saved, the distinction matters little." He guided her to the porch swing, settling beside her as the sun began to crest the mountains. "I have news from Denver." "Oh, the Territorial Medical Board has approved your application for official recognition. You are now, without question, the legally recognized physician of record for Saint Elmo and surrounding communities." Zephyr nearly spilled her coffee. That's remarkable. The board has been notoriously reluctant to recognize female physicians. They were impressed by the testimonials, Zav explained, particularly from Sullivan and the other mine owners. When men of financial influence speak, even the most tradition-bound institutions tend to listen. "Thank you," Zephyr said, knowing he must have been instrumental in gathering those testimonials. "This means more than I can express." "There's more," Zav continued. "The board is establishing a small hospital in Buena Vista. They've offered you a position not as the head physician, unfortunately, but as a specialist in obstetrics and women's ailments. Zephyr's heart sank. A hospital position would advance her career significantly, but it would mean leaving Saint Elmo, leaving the community she had grown to love, leaving Xavier. "I see," she said carefully. "When would they expect an answer? They're not expecting one," Xavier replied, watching her face. "I declined on your behalf." "You what?" Zephyr stared at him, astonished. "Why would you do that?" "Because Saint Elmo needs you more than Buena Vista does." He took her hand. "And because I need you here with me." The implication hung in the air between them. Zephyr's pulse quickened as Xavier shifted to face her directly. "I had planned a more romantic setting for this," he said, a hint of nervousness in his voice. "But dawn on a porch after a night of delivering babies seems oddly appropriate for us." From his pocket, he withdrew a small velvet box. Opening it revealed a ring, not the ostentatious diamond she might have expected from a wealthy mine owner, but an elegant emerald surrounded by small pearls. "Zephyr Zavala, you have brought healing and hope to this community, and joy to my life. I love your brilliant mind, your skilled hands, your compassionate heart. I love watching you work, seeing the respect you've earned through sheer determination and excellence. I want to build a life with you, one where your work and mine complement each other rather than compete." He took a breath, his eyes never leaving hers. "Will you marry me?" Zephyr looked at the ring, then at the man offering it. She thought of the obstacles they would face. A professional woman married to a prominent businessman would still raise eyebrows, even in the more progressive atmosphere of the West. But they had already overcome so much. "Yes," she said, surprising herself with the lack of hesitation. "Yes, Xavier, I will marry you." His smile was radiant as he slipped the ring onto her finger. "It matches your eyes," he said softly. "I saw it and knew it belonged on your hand." Their kiss was tender, full of promise and passion. When they finally parted, the sun had fully risen, painting the town in golden light. "We should discuss the practical aspects," Zephyr said, ever the pragmatist. "My practice will continue exactly as it is," Zav assured her. "The only difference will be your name on the sign if you choose to change it, and perhaps a larger space eventually as the town grows." "And children?" she asked directly. "Most men expect their wives to produce heirs." Xavier's expression grew thoughtful. "I would welcome children with you, Zephyr, but I don't expect you to set aside your calling to become solely a mother. We would find a way to balance both aspects of our lives, perhaps a nurse to assist in the clinic, household help to manage our home." His understanding eased the last of Zephyr's reservations. "Then yes," she repeated, more confidently this time. "I will marry you, Xavier Novak." The news of their engagement spread through Saint Elmo with remarkable speed. By midday, Zephyr had received dozens of well wishes from patients and townspeople. Even the barber, now one of her most vocal supporters, stopped by the clinic to offer congratulations. "Never thought I'd see the day when our local witch became the town's most eligible bride," he joked. The term witch now used with affectionate respect rather than suspicion. The wedding was set for the following month, a simple ceremony in the town's small church, with a celebration afterward open to the entire community. As the day approached, Zephyr found herself increasingly caught up in preparations, despite her insistence that the event should be modest. "You deserve a proper wedding," Xavier insisted when she protested the growing guest list. "These people want to celebrate with us, Zephyr. It's their way of showing acceptance." She couldn't argue with that logic. And secretly, a part of her, the part that had been an outsider for so long, delighted in the community's embrace. The morning of the wedding dawned clear and crisp, with the aspen trees just beginning to turn golden. Sarah Coleman and several other women Zephyr had helped arrived early to assist with her preparations. They dressed her in a gown of cream-colored silk, simply cut but elegant, with small pearl buttons down the back that matched her engagement ring. "You look beautiful, Doctor," Sarah said, arranging Zephyr's dark hair in a simple updo adorned with small white flowers. "Mr. Novak won't know what hit him." The church was filled to capacity when Zephyr arrived. As she walked down the aisle alone, her parents having been unable to make the journey from Philadelphia, she saw faces that had once regarded her with suspicion, now smiling with genuine pleasure. At the altar stood Xavier, handsome in a new black suit, his eyes never leaving her as she approached. The ceremony was brief but meaningful. They exchanged vows they had written themselves, promising to support each other's work and aspirations, to build a life based on mutual respect and love. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, the cheer that went up from the congregation startled both of them with its enthusiasm. The celebration that followed lasted well into the night. The entire town seemed determined to make the occasion memorable. There was music, dancing, abundant food and drink. The mining companies had declared a holiday, and miners from throughout the region joined the festivities. Late in the evening, as Zephyr danced with her new husband, she noticed Daniels approaching. The man who had once pursued her through the forest now looked almost sheepish as he waited for a break in the music. "Dr. Novak," he said, using her new married name for the first time. "I wanted to offer my congratulations and to thank you proper for what you did for my boy last week." Zephyr remembered the case. Daniel's 10-year-old son had fallen from a horse, breaking his arm. She had set and cast it, showing the boy how to keep it clean and explaining when he could expect to use it again. "Your son will heal well," she assured him. "He's a brave boy." Daniels nodded, clearly uncomfortable but determined. "My wife says. She says you're not a witch at all, says you're an angel sent to help us women and children when the men are too stubborn to see sense." He glanced at Xavier. "Reckon your husband saw that before the rest of us." "Zephyr doesn't need me or anyone else to validate her abilities," Xavier replied, his arm tightening around her waist. "But I'm grateful every day that she chose to share her life with me." When the last of the guests had departed, and they were finally alone in Xavier's cabin, now their home until the larger house he was building was completed, Zephyr found herself overcome with emotion. "Are you happy, Mrs. Dr. Novak?" Xavier asked, using the playful title they had devised to acknowledge both her professional and marital identities. "Happier than I ever imagined possible," she admitted, stepping into his embrace. "I came west seeking acceptance for my work. I never expected to find love as well." "Your miracle cowboy," Xavier murmured against her hair, referring to a nickname some in town had given him after he had so publicly supported the witch doctor. "My partner," Zephyr corrected, lifting her face for his kiss. "In all things." The years that followed fulfilled the promise of that wedding day. Saint Elmo grew as the mines prospered, and with it, Zephyr's practice. Xavier's business interests expanded as well, though he arranged his affairs to ensure he was never away from home for long. Within a year, they had moved into the new house. Xavier had built a comfortable 2-story home with a separate wing designed specifically as a clinic. As the town's population increased, Zephyr hired a nurse to assist her and took on a young female apprentice eager to follow in her footsteps. Their first child, a son they named Thomas after Xavier's father, was born 2 years after their marriage. Zephyr continued her practice throughout her pregnancy, delivering babies right up until her own confinement. 6 weeks after Thomas's birth, she was back in her clinic, infant often cradled in one arm while she examined patients with her free hand. Far from objecting, The townspeople seemed to take pride in their unique doctor, who balanced motherhood and medicine with such grace. Children in particular were fascinated by Dr. Novak's baby, and Zephyr found that his presence often helped put younger patients at ease. 2 years later, twins Catherine and James joined the family, testing even Zephyr's considerable energy and organizational skills. But with Xavier's unwavering support and the assistance of a kindly widow who helped manage their household, she continued her medical practice without interruption. As the children grew, they became familiar fixtures in the clinic, learning early to be quiet when mother was with patients and to respect the sanctity of her work. Thomas, in particular, showed an interest in medicine that made Zephyr's heart swell with pride. Like mother, like son, Xavier observed one evening, watching 7-year-old Thomas carefully bandaging his sister's scraped knee under Zephyr's supervision. "Let's hope society is more accepting of male nurses than it was of female doctors," Zephyr replied with a smile. The town of Saint Elmo continued to prosper into the 1880s, despite the boom and bust cycle that affected so many mining communities. Xavier's diversified investments helped stabilize the local economy, while Zephyr's clinic provided essential medical services that made the remote mountain town more attractive to families. In 1885, 7 years after Zephyr had first arrived in Saint Elmo, the territorial governor visited as part of a tour of successful settlements. During a public ceremony, he recognized Dr. Zephyr Novak for her contributions to medicine and community health, presenting her with a certificate of merit that would hang proudly in her clinic for decades to come. Colorado Territory owes a debt to pioneer physicians like Dr. Novak, the governor declared. Women and men who bring healing and hope to our frontier communities, often at great personal sacrifice. As Zephyr accepted the certificate, she caught Xavier's eye in the crowd. He smiled, pride evident in every line of his face. Beside him stood their 3 children, Thomas now a serious 9-year-old, the twins fidgeting in their Sunday best. Later that evening, as they sat on the porch of their home watching the sunset paint the mountains, Zephyr reflected on the journey that had brought her to this moment. "When I first came to Saint Elmo, I never imagined this," she said, leaning against Xavier's shoulder. "I was prepared for struggle, for hostility. I hoped at best for grudging acceptance. And instead, you found a community that now can't imagine life without their witch doctor," Xavier finished, wrapping his arm around her. "Their miracle worker, you mean," she corrected with a laugh. "Isn't that what you called me? My miracle," he confirmed, turning to kiss her softly. "The best kind of magic, the kind that comes from knowledge, skill, and compassion." Inside the house, they could hear their children's voices, the twins arguing over a game while Thomas attempted to mediate. The sounds of family, of home, of belonging, all things Zephyr had once thought she might have to sacrifice for her calling. "No regrets?" Xavier asked, as he often did on these quiet evenings. "Not one," Zephyr replied, as she always did. "How could I regret the path that led me here?" They sat in comfortable silence as darkness fell and stars appeared above the mountains. Saint Elmo settled into evening routines, lamps being lit, children called to supper, miners returning from late shifts. A community where a woman doctor had once been called a witch, now thrived under her care. And at her side, always, the man who had seen beyond suspicion to recognize her gifts for what they truly were, not witchcraft, but the everyday miracle of healing. In the years to come, their partnership would weather challenges both personal and professional. Colorado's achievement of statehood would bring changes to medical licensing and practice. The railroad's arrival would transform the isolated mountain community. Their children would grow, following their own paths, Thomas indeed pursuing medicine, Catherine becoming a teacher, and James taking over aspects of his father's business. Through it all, Zephyr and Xavier remained each other's strongest advocates and most honest critics. Their love, like the best medicines, only grew more effective with time. And the legend of Saint Elmo's, witch doctor and her devoted husband, became part of Colorado folklore, a story of prejudice overcome, of courage rewarded, of healing that extended far beyond the physical. Not magic, Zephyr would always insist when people used that word to describe her work. Just medicine, applied with knowledge and care. But in the depths of her heart, she knew there had been one true miracle in her life, finding love and acceptance in the place she least expected it, with the man who had called her his miracle from the very beginning.